Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi guys, I'm Nabilah Sagita Irawan from English Education Department of 5C class at Islamic State University of Sultan Syarif Qasim Riau. And here I will explain about the interview as my project of research development subject, which guided by Mr. Nuardi. Okay. So, an interview is an interview between two or more people on a topic of mutual interest. Interviews enable participants to discuss their interpretation of the world in which they live and to express how they regard situation from their own point of view. The interview is a flexible tool for data collection, enabling multisensory channels to be used. The order of the interview may be controlled while still giving space for spontaneity. On the other hand, the researcher must be aware that interviews are expansive in time and subject to interviewer's bias. In contrast to an everyday conversation, it has a specific purpose, it is often question-based, and interview alone may express ignorance and not the interview. And interviews' responses must be as explicit and often as detailed as possible. Next, conceptions of the interview. Kitwood at 1977 lucidly contrasts three conceptions of an interview. The first conception is that of a potential means of a pure information transfer. If the interviewer does his job well, accurate data may be obtained. The second conception of the interview is that of a transaction which inevitably has bias that needs to be recognized and controlled. And according to this viewpoint, Kitwood explains that each participant in an interview will define the situation in a particular way. And the third conception is the interview sees it as an encounter necessarily sharing many of the features of everyday life. And then, purposes. The research interview has been defined as a two-person conversation initiated by the interviewer for the specific purpose of obtaining research-relevant information and focused by him on content specified by research objectives of systematic description, prediction, or explanation. The purposes of the interview in the wider context life are many and varied. For example, first, evaluating or assess a person in some respect. The second, selecting or promoting an employee. The third, affecting therapeutic change, as in the psychiatric interview. The fourth, testing or developing hypotheses. The fifth, gathering data, as in surveys or experimental situation. And the last is sampling respondents' opinions, as in doorstep interviews. And then, types of interview. Patent at 1980 outlines four types. First, informal conversational interviews. The second, interview guide approaches. The third, standardized open-ended interviews. And the last, closed quantitative interviews. The first, informal conversational interviews. The characteristic is questions emerge from the immediate context and are asked in the natural course of things. There is no predomination of question topics or wording. And then the strength increases the silence and relevance of questions. Interviews are built on and emerge from observation. The interview can be matched to individuals and circumstances. And the weakness is different information collected from different people with different questions. Less systematic and comprehensive is certain questions don't arise naturally. Data organization and analysis can be quite difficult. And then the second is interview guide approaches. The characteristic, topics and issues to be covered are specified in advance in outline form. Interviewer decides sequence and working of questions in the course of interview. The strength, the outline increases the comprehensiveness of the data and makes data collection somewhat systematic for each respondent. Logical gaps in data can be anticipated and closed. Interviews remain fairly conversational and situational. And then the weakness, Important and silent topic may be inadvertently omitted. Interviewer flexibility in sequencing and wording questions can result in substantially different responses, thus reducing the comparability of responses. And then the third is standardized open-ended interviews. The characteristic, the exact wording and sequence of questions are determined in advance. All interviewees are asked the same basic question in the same order. The strength, data are complete for each person on the topics addressed in the interview. Reduces interview effects and bias when several interviewers are used. Permits decision makers to see and review the instrumentation used in the evaluation. And then the weakness, little flexibility in relating the interview to particular individuals and circumstances. Standardized wording of question may constrain and limit naturalness and relevance of question and answer. And then the last is closed quantitative interviews. So the characteristic, questions, and response categories are determined in advance. Responses are fixed and respondents chosen from among those fixed responses. The strengths, data analysis is simple. Responses can be directly compared and easily aggregate. Many short questions can be asked in a short time. And then the weakness, respondents must fit their experiences and feelings into the research's categories, may be perceived as impersonal, irrelevant, and mechanistic. And the next is planning interview-based research procedures. Kylie at 1996 sets out 7 stages of an interview investigation that can be used to plan this type of research. First, thematizing. It may begin by outlining by theoretical basis of the study, its broad aims, its practical value, and the reason why the interview approach was chosen. The second is designing. This needs to be done in such a way that the question adequately reflects what the researcher is trying to find out. So there are several factors to consider when choosing a question format. The first, the objective of the interview, and then the nature of the subject matter, and then the respondent's level of education, the kind of information, whether or not the respondent's thought needs to be structured, and then the last is the kind of relationship the interviewer can expect to develop with the respondent. Next is interviewing. So interviewers are initiating the research themselves. They will clearly select their own respondents. The conduct of the interview should be explained about what happens and how, and the structure and organization of the interview, and then how responses may be recorded, such as to seek permission of this to happen, and then these procedures should be observed throughout. Next is transcribing. So a crucial step in interviewing is transcribing, for there is the potential for massive data loss, distortion, and the reduction of complexity. And the next is analyzing. Several stages in analysis. First, generating natural units of meaning, and then classifying, categorizing, and ordering these units of meaning. And then the third is structuring narratives to describe the interview content, and then the last is interpreting the interview data. Next is verifying. Kylie at 1996 makes the point that validation must take place at all 7 stages of the interview-based investigation. First, the theoretical foundation must be rigorous and there must be a logical link. And then all aspects of the research design must be sound and rigorous. And then the third, the data must be accurate, reliable, and valid. And then the translation of the data from an oral to a written medium must demonstrate fidelity. And then data analysis must demonstrate fidelity to the data. And then validation procedures should be in place and used. And then the last is the reporting. The last is the reporting. Kylie at 1996 suggests several elements of a report. First, an introduction that includes the main themes and content. The second is an outline and methodology and methods from designing to interviewing, transcription, and analysis. The third is the result, where the data analysis, interpretation, and verification, and then the last is a discussion. Okay, the last part of this subject is group interviewing. So group interviewing is one technique within the methodology of interviewing to have ground in popularity. There are several things to consider when conducting group interviews. For example, how to divide your attention as interviewer, and then how to handle people who are too quiet, too noisy, who monopolize the conversation, and who argue and disagree with each other. And then the last is how to handle differences in how talkative people are. First, interviewing children. Group interviews of children might also be less intimidating from them than individual interviews. Eder and Fingerson at 2003 suggest that a power and status dynamic is heavily implicated in interviewing children. They have little in comparison to the adult. There are several difficulties in interviewing children. For example, first, how to understand what children mean and what they say. The second, how to keep the interview relevant. And then the last is respond to the child who says something that immediately wishes she had not said it. The second is focus group. Focus group are a form of group interview, though not in the sense of a backwards and forwards between interviewer and group. Focus groups are useful for first, developing themes, topic, and schedules flexibly. The second, gathering qualitative data, and the last is generating data quickly and at low cost. The third is the non-directive interview and the focus interview. And then the fourth is telephone interviewing. Dicker and Gilbert, Nias, Avenim, Borg-Engel, Shaughnessy, and Shui at 2003 suggest several attractions to telephone interviewing because, first, it is sometimes cheaper and quicker than face-to-face interviewing. The second, it enables researchers to select respondents from a much more dispersed population than if they have to travel to meet the interviewees. The third is travel costs are a myth. The fourth is it is particularly useful for brief surveys, and the last is it may protect the anonymity of respondents more than a personal interview. And then the last part is ethical issues in interviewing. So that's all from my presentation today about the interview as my project of research development subject guided by Mr. Nuardi. And that's all from me. Pardon me for all of my mistakes during presenting my material. Thank you for attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.